Hello, Carbeth Hutters. I'm Alistair McIntosh, a writer, academic and activist, and I've been asked to say a few words of reflection on the Carbeth Hutters, with it being over 20 years since a campaign began that brought it into community ownership. In Scotland, we stand the ground we're standing upon. We stand upon the shoulders of those who have gone before us to plough that ground and make it what it is. Over 20 years ago, there was a bid to evict the Hutters in order to use the land for more commercial purposes. A huge battle commenced around 1997-98, just after, on the Isle of Egg, I'd been involved with bringing that community into community land ownership. And so it was that I got invited to be an advisor to the Hutters. So I'm just going to share with you a little of that history, perhaps to look back and perhaps to consider its relevance to our times today, these unsettled times we're living in. And this video is basically going to be in two parts. First of all, I'm going to share some documents and some reflections from the original period. And then I'm going to cut to Closh Lighthouse out at Gourock, where I was out fishing the other day and I made a wee video also reflecting on the Hutters, but in terms of the importance of being in nature and of people being able to find their grounding and their peace, their rest in places of nature. So folks, I did warn you that I'm a writer and academic, or at least try to look like one. So here's where I work, here's my desk, just within the parish boundary of Govan here in Glasgow. There's the Govan workspace backing onto our garden and an old school over there. And I'd like to share with you some of what I've got on my desk here. So here's a letter from April 1998 to me from Chris Balance, who is then the secretary of the Carbeth Hutters Association. And he's saying that you've just had an excellent meeting in the run-up to a rally, and that he was now thinking where to go in terms of strategy planning for the next 6 months, but it was such an energising meeting. Notice the antiquity. That is an old dot matrix printer that he was using back then. You can see the dotty makeup of it. That's how long ago we're talking. This was, what, 22 years ago, something like that. Who would believe that such time has passed? And then if I can move now to the Hutters News, number 23, from around the same time here. We now have an advocate who will be arguing our case in court. He's called Mark Lindsay, and he's one of the most brilliant young advocates around, destined for the top of his profession. There we are. If you've got no money, always big up your advocate. We're lucky to have him. He's confident we can have legal arguments to use against Barnes Graham, the landlord. Mark will be arguing Bill McQueen's case, which comes up this Monday, 14th December at Stirling at 10 a.m. If you'd be interested in seeing this case, come along. We're organising lifts for those who don't have transport, meeting at the Carbeth Inn, and so on. And then there's this bit here. The advocate has asked us to make particularly sure that we are all totally silent in court. No gasps of disbelief or derisive laughter at Barnes Graham's evidence. Also, please, I can't believe it's me writing this, says Chris Balance. Please dress respectably. Oh, well. And so to Stirling Sheriff Court. So what's my role in that? And I'll just tell you a little bit about this quirky side of it, because of course, let me just turn the camera around for a moment if I can. This is very amateur video, but there we go. If you're going to be doing this kind of thing with zero resources, you've got to be inventive. And with a case like this, it's as much about the publicity you can generate as what happens in the court of law. And so, when Chris consulted me about it, I said, well, one of the things that particularly interests me is theology. I've got loads of books on that here. And it does strike me that at that time, feudal law in Scotland meant that in theory, God owned the land, who handed it down to the Queen, who handed it down to the landlords, who rented it out to the people. And so I dug into the old legal case books and put together what I called the case for God. And this was to be part of the defence when Chris Balance's own case came up. Look at that beard, in this day and age, with a beard like that, I wouldn't have needed a mask for the COVID. The microbes would be filtered out just by sucking through it like that. So there we are. I mean, we all look so young. That was 22 years ago. You can see it's all gone white now. So what was it that I did in that? Well, in fact, the outcome of that case, or rather the case that I put, was published in an academic journal in 2000, Eco-Theology. And there we are alongside academic papers on things like religious responses to fisheries decline in Irish coastal communities. You've got the case for God, Carbeth Hutter's feudal defence against eviction. In other words, arguing that if you take seriously the way the law was then the idea that God would evict the Hutters would be kind of beneath the dignity of God. Well, let's just have a wee look at something that's in here. There we have the paper. You'll find that paper on my website if you want to look at it. But there's a lovely bit here where I say, writing of the importance of Carbeth to low-income people whose only window on nature, note that, their only window on nature might otherwise be a TV set in a high-rise tower block. Jimmy McGregor said, "As a lad, my idea of Shangri-La was a wooden hut in Carbeth. Our parents came out partly to attempt to live off the land, partly to ease the financial burden on their families, and partly to escape the crushing hopelessness of boredom and unemployment. They lived really rough. Great friendships were formed. There were great sing-songs and men signed on there to fight fascism in the Civil War. The story is that the fire was never allowed to go out." Well, so it was that we made our case in Carbeth, in the Stirling Sheriff Court. It was, of course, thrown straight out of court, but at that time these pictures had been taken and the whole thing had been covered in the media, which helped to ginger up the campaign. And of course I sent the case to Mr. Barnes-Graham, who apparently was a man not entirely without principle by any means. He considered himself to be Christian, and here's the reply that I got back from him. Notice that his is not an inkjet printer, it was a daisy wheel printer, which was the height of technology for high quality in those times. Thank you for your letter of 21st May 1999, with enclosures which I have noted. Well, at least he gave me a reply back. So what I'm going to do now, folks, if I can just flip this camera. So there we are. That intervention that I described in my role as an advisor to the Carbeth Hutters Association was only one of so many inputs going on by so many people to bring the Carbeth Hutters into being a community-owned trust. In fact, reading this newsletter again, if I can just reach for it, there's another bit, if I can get my glasses on, that I'd just like to read to you, where the vision is laid out that if we can persuade Barnes-Graham to sell, then the trust would own the estates that the huts are on, the part of the estates that the huts are on. Hutters would elect their representatives onto the trust each year. They, with the Hutters' agreement, would employ an experienced factor probably not a hutter, in other words, somebody to manage the estate, but all policy making will be done by the hutters in general meetings and by elected representatives in committees. So there you see the Carbeth hutters, an early example of urban or just outside urban land reform in Scotland, building on what was happening already in the rural areas. Well, what I'd like to do now, folks, is I'd like to take you to the second part of this, where I filmed this bit a couple of weeks ago out at Closh Lighthouse, as I said, and just a reflection because, I'm sitting here in an office in my home in Glasgow, but the hutting is really about being outdoors. So let's go there and reflect on the importance of people and taking care of nature. Hello, folks. This is Alistair here, Alistair McIntosh, and 21 years ago I was involved in helping the Carbeth hutters with the battle to bring the land under community control. And I want to talk about that, but I'm talking to you in rather an unusual situation. I'm holding my camera here. If I can turn it round, hopefully you can see me there, all togged up, because I'm about to take one of the neighbours' sons out mackerel fishing. You can see somebody's already on the go there, and I'm going to just walk back towards our boat, which is a magnificent inflatable canoe. There's Shay sitting on the shore there just waiting for me. And I just want to say that if you look over there, you can see the mountains of Arran, where you've got Lamlash Bay, which is a 1 square mile marine protection zone, where they are looking after nature for nature's own sake, but also for the sake of the people. So it's a no-take zone. You don't take fish from there. And so the lobsters, the scallops, everything has been coming back. The fish, the cod have been spawning in there. It used to be, the old fishermen will tell, back in the 1970s, they would get 20-30 pound cod just out from here. Now you only get mackerel, because nature, just 3/4 of an hour from Glasgow here, has been abused. And this is why also with the Carbeth hutters, it seemed so important to us 20 years ago during the battle with those court cases. It was just so important to protect a space for Glasgow, to protect a living lung for people, a place of tranquility where people could get away from traffic, get away from noise, get away from blaring music and all the rest of it, and just come out and be human and be community together, be held in the basket of one another's community, to weave that basket of community. The 21 years after the court battles that led eventually to the Carbeth hutters becoming a community-owned trust, that's my reflection. I really appreciate what you've achieved. I really encourage you to continue to keep it as a place for nature and for people to rediscover the meaning of their human nature. And we are now off out into the sea with our little inflatable canoe, and hopefully we'll get a catch of mackerel on the hand lines. So wish us good luck, folks, and bless what you're doing. It's important work, not just for you, but for everybody.